It's time. Monday Night Football, Week 17. We have a completely meaningless game between the Detroit Lions and the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers are out of the playoff hunt. This game has no impact on the Lions in their fight for the 1 seed with my Vikings. Should move this a little bit. So it's kind of meaningless. This game, the 1 seed in the NFC comes down to next week, regardless of how this game goes. So the Lions have nothing to play for. The 49ers have nothing to play for. But Dan Campbell doesn't believe in resting his starters at all. It sounds like, from what he is saying, Dan Campbell was asked, I'll just say this up front. Dan Campbell was asked on December 23rd, this is in the Coach Speak Index Discord, he was asked on whether he will change his approach to their Monday Night Football matchup with the Niners if the Vikings beat the Packers on Sunday and make the outcome of the Lions Week 17 game meaningless. He said, "I'll make this easy for everybody. We are bringing everything we've got to this game, and we are playing. I don't care what it looks like. We're going out to play and win this game." Same thing happened last year. They had a meaningless game in Week 18. The starters played their usual minutes. If you look at the defensive starters, snap shares, they played just the same as usual snap shares. Amon-Ra St. Brown played only 72% of the snaps. I don't really know what happened there. It was a season low for him, so he was a little bit lower in the snap share than he usually is. But for the most part, everybody played their usual snap shares last year. Of course, Sam LaPorta also got hurt in that game, so it didn't work out the way it should have. Maybe he learns from it and adjusts a little bit, but that's kind of a fun situation that we're dealing with here, where we don't really know if the Lions are going to change their personnel at all based on this game being meaningless. I'm not any kind of change to the 49ers because they've been out of the playoff hunt and they've continued to play their starters as much as ever. So yeah, interesting one. We're going to go, as usual, position by position: quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers. I will take any questions as we go. I'm also going to take a brief look after we go through the positions at FanDuel, see if anything stands out on FanDuel. Then I'll make a couple lineups on DraftKings, just play around with some lineups on DraftKings, take any other questions that you guys have. But yeah, it is an interesting one. I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts. If you have any tidbits, anything that I missed. I've just read the Coach Speak, and we have the one game sample from last year that it seems like the Lions are probably going to play this straight up. I will adjust my player pool a little bit based on the fact that this game is meaningless, and we will talk about that as we go. While you guys are coming in, if you haven't already done so, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, I'm trying to get to 5,000 subscribers on the Flannelverse YouTube by the end of the NFL season. Have more than 800 left to go before we get to 5,000. So I would appreciate your support if you would subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Of course, if you're already subscribed, if you can like the video, comment, all of that is helpful. Tell your friends, all of that is helpful as well in trying to grow the channel. I will be doing a lot of content in the off season this year. I don't know how many people who play NFL DFS care about things like NFL best ball, but I'll be doing a lot of NFL best ball content. Once again, I'll be doing some DFS content for NBA, at least, maybe MLB, I don't know, but at least NBA I'll do some content. So yeah, if you want to subscribe, would appreciate it. Okay, let's start with the quarterbacks. We've got Jared Goff and we have Brock Purdy. Jared Goff coming in at just 3% projected ownership at captain at RotoGrinders. Actually, I'm going to reset this real quick because I had pulled this up like an hour ago. Just want to make sure that nothing has changed in the past hour. Sometimes you get late changes here. Yeah, Jared Goff still coming in at 3%. Brock Purdy at 10.5%. That's pretty interesting. Seeing 3% ownership going to Jared Goff at captain, fairly surprising to me. There were a few places when I was looking earlier that the projections are very different from one place to the next, and we will get into that a bit later on. But I don't think, looks like this is pretty consistent around the industry, that we're projecting pretty low ownership going to Jared Goff at captain in particular. And he's a pretty intriguing captain play to me at 3%. I don't usually love playing quarterbacks in the captain spot, but when they come in at 3%, suddenly I think, That seems like a pretty good number for playing somebody like Jared Goff, who has several weapons he can spread the ball around to. So 3%, I do like that number, and I think I'll force my way to a little bit more than 3% Jared Goff at captain. Also coming in at 33% in the flex. Honestly, both of these numbers are low enough that I thought earlier in the day that I might try to come in a little bit underweight on Jared Goff. These are fairly low numbers, though, for a quarterback of Jared Goff's skill and the offense. How many points we can reasonably hope for them to score. I'm kind of backing off that stance and thinking I might actually want to be overweight, at least in the captain spot, to Jared Goff. Probably in the flex as well at this point, if these are going to be the numbers that he comes in at. Lions offense has not been throwing a ton in recent weeks. Over the past 5, just 26th in neutral pass rate. Goff still averaging 23.4 fantasy points over that span. Not the best matchup. 49ers defense has allowed the second fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the last 5 weeks. So ultimately, I think my stance is the ownership probably looks fine in the flex, 33%. If that is where it comes in, I think I'm happy to get to that number. I think I want to be above weight to 3% in the captain spot in particular. I think Goff just has the ability. I mean, we saw it a couple weeks ago in Buffalo where he put up 40 plus fantasy points. Obviously, that's not going to happen unless the 49ers do push them a little bit and they have to continue to score points. But with how banged up the Lions defense is, I think that is certainly possible. And so I think 3%, I'll take that number on Goff. What's up, Ranger in Bloomington? Are you at the Mall of America? Is that where you are in Bloomington? Yeah, thank you for the reminder, Randall. Please do like the video if you haven't already done so. Good to see many of you here. T asked the question, what player has the most to prove? That's a good question. That's one maybe we need to be thinking about here. I'm not aware of any. I have not heard any chatter about any incentive or milestone issues with the players. I would be curious if anybody else has anything on that front. I've looked around a little bit to see if I could find anything that might be helpful, and didn't find anything in the bit that I looked around. That's useful information to have. So if anybody has anything to share there, always happy to hear it. Brock Purdy coming in at 40% ownership in the flex, getting a bit more at captain, getting 10.5% ownership at captain. That's probably a fine number. My guess is that I come in a little bit underweight on Brock Purdy, at captain in particular, that 10%. Don't love that number for Brock Purdy. I think he's a strong play, so I might not be too far from it. But he's averaging just 13.1 fantasy points over the past 5 weeks, even with the 49ers 11th in neutral pass rate. So they've been throwing it quite a bit, and he's still just averaging 13.1 fantasy points per game over the past 5 weeks. With that said, the Lions defense has been atrocious in recent weeks. It's not their fault. They're incredibly injured. Over the past 5 weeks, the most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, which is why ultimately I think 50% Brock Purdy is fine. That's probably about where I end up. I don't think, not taking any major stands with the quarterbacks. So I'll just note with the stacking for these quarterbacks, if you have them anywhere in your lineup, either of these quarterbacks, I'm going to be stacking them. I'm forcing the stack, even though Brock Purdy's actually been running like 22 yards per game this year with 4 rushing touchdowns on the season. Like he's been a pretty good rushing quarterback this year, but still going to be stacking both quarterbacks regardless of where I have them in the lineup. Both I prefer to have at least double stacked when I have them in the captain spot. Although again, Brock Purdy, you could be a little bit looser if you want to only require one pass catcher with Brock Purdy in the captain spot. And with Goff, I would include Jahmyr, Gibbs in my stacks, or if you're setting rules, I would include him as a potential pass catcher for your Goff stacks. I don't think I'm doing that with any of the Niners running backs. I did include Kyle Juszczyk, I guess, as a potential pass catcher with Brock Purdy, but none of the Guerendo or Patrick Taylor. I don't think I'm including them as pass catching options for stacking purposes. And again, I want to have my quarterbacks, if I have them in the captain spot, I want them to be at least double stacked, under the assumption that they're not rushing quarterbacks, which again is a little bit hazy with Brock Purdy. But if you assume a non-rushing quarterback like Jared Goff, you want them to be at least double stacked when you have them at captain, because for every passing play, the receiver outscores the quarterback. They get a point per reception, they get more points per yard, per touchdown, etc. So it's difficult for the quarterback to be optimal at MVP. They're putting up a lot of points via yards and touchdowns, etc. It's difficult if they're too concentrated on one player and they don't have multiple players putting up pretty big scores. If the quarterback is going to be optimal and they're not running the ball, they need to be spreading the ball around to multiple pass catchers, so those pass catchers are not scoring more than them. Sometimes there's exceptions. If like there's a pass catcher that's way more expensive than the quarterback, they can outscore the quarterback and still not be the optimal captain. But these quarterbacks are expensive enough that I think I want to have double stacks if I have them in the captain spot. All right, I think that is enough on the quarterbacks. They're generally the easiest position, the most straightforward. So let's move on to running backs. Aztec asked, are you worried about Detroit? Gibbs showing up as my highest captain, but I want Purdy, I think. I'm not that worried about it, just based on what happened last year. Well, we'll talk about the running backs now. So I guess we can get into it as we go. All right, move this down to running backs. So let's get into it with the running backs. Gibbs, 23.5% projected ownership at captain. In the flex, 51.5% ownership. So he's getting nearly 75% ownership. I guess I would say I am concerned to the point where I'll probably be underweight to the field on Gibbs. The role is tremendous in his first game last week. Actually, I can just pull it up here with the game log here for Detroit. So first game without David Montgomery last week, Jahmyr Gibbs had 23 carries and 5 targets on 54.5% route participation. And for a running back as good as Gibbs, if you're going to get this kind of volume, like you are in absolutely a smash play. So I think Gibbs looks awesome, and I will have, he'll be in more than half of my lineups. But with the field getting to, close to 75% Gibbs, I do think I'll be a little bit light there. I am setting my cap at captain ownership at 20%. I don't think I'm making an exception for anybody tonight, so I think I'll probably have 20% Gibbs. Happy to be just a little bit underweight to the field there. Probably come in a little bit underweight to the field at flex. And it's, again, not because he's not a great play, not because I'm all that worried about it, but I'm like slightly like I'm dinging him slightly for the possibility that he doesn't play a full workload here, because Dan Campbell didn't say specifically like we're going to use the same person. So we're going to give it everything we got. We really want to win this. We saw last year they mostly use the starters as usual, but I think that there are there's here actually let me pull up another. Let me read off another coach speak quote that I thought was kind of interesting from earlier. Let me find it. Okay, so on the 16th, after David Montgomery's injury, Dan Campbell said, we've got a lot of confidence in Jahmyr Gibbs. He's gotten better and better throughout the season. He's getting better in the pass game, and you see what he's able to do in the run game. We got to use and maximize the reps that we have for him and be careful that we don't give him too much. We still got to be able to be smart with him, but we need him, and that's the trick. So those other guys, Craig Reynolds, gonna need to help us, which he'll be ready, and Sion Vaki potentially as well. So this is before the last game where Gibbs got all the work. Dan Campbell did kind of express like, well, we'd like to use these other guys, make sure that we, keep Gibbs ready. We got to be careful that we don't give him too much, as Dan Campbell said. So I kind of think in a meaningless game, like he's aware obviously that he doesn't want to be overusing, extending his one of his best players. So this would make sense to be a game where potentially they use Gibbs a little bit less. So maybe instead of 23 carries and 5 targets, we see 18 carries and 4 targets or something like that. Like that is the extent that I'm worried about Gibbs. I still think he's going to be the top running back as long as the game is competitive. I think Gibbs is going to get the majority of carries, but I wouldn't be that surprised if we just see Craig Reynolds and or Jermar Jefferson and or Sion Vaki mix in just a little bit more than usual in this game. And actually, while we're on the topic of the Detroit running backs, I also thought this was a kind of interesting quote from offensive coordinator Ben Johnson on the 27th. This was just a few days ago. With David Montgomery out, he said, I would anticipate a similar backfield rotation going forward like we saw last week. Reps in the 40 range for Jahmyr Gibbs, Jermar Jefferson, and Craig Reynolds coming in to spell Gibbs for a bit, and then Sion Vaki for the 2-minute drive. That part kind of was intriguing to me. I didn't realize that Sion Vaki was the guy that they are, anticipating using in the 2-minute drive. It just seems like Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of made for the 2-minute drive. So I thought that was interesting that they want to use Vaki in the 2-minute drive. Vaki played 5 snaps last week. Yeah, I guess he ran 5 routes on those 5 plays. So I guess it makes sense. They were using him as a receiving back. He saw 2 targets. So yeah, ultimately, I think I'm going to be just a little bit underweight to Gibbs. I still want to have it'd be pretty risky to fade Gibbs here. I do think he's going to get the lion's share of the work, but I think the lion's share still might be a little bit less than usual this week. And I think the other running backs probably come in a little bit more than usual. Or I don't even know if I think that. I think that it's sharp to build that way. I guess it's not necessarily that I think it's the most likely outcome that these other running backs cut into Gibbs's workload, but I think it's likely enough, and the field isn't necessarily going to adjust enough. And that also depends on where you look. So let's take a look at the ownership here, because I think it's very different at Roto-Grinders than some other places, which is going to have a big impact on what I want to do specifically with Craig Reynolds. So again, slight light fade for me on Gibbs. Craig Reynolds, Roto-Grinders is projecting for 25% ownership. At 25% ownership, I wouldn't be super interested. I was kind of disappointed to see that number here, and it does give me some pause seeing Craig Reynolds projected for this much ownership here, but nowhere else has him this much. Actually, earlier in the day, he has come up from where he was this morning, but still other places have Craig Reynolds like just 10%, 10 to 13% is what I'm seeing other places. So it's a tricky slate from that standpoint as well. I'm kind of expecting that the field is not going to play 25% Craig Reynolds, but there have been times that I've doubted these ownership projections, and I have been totally wrong. So it's possible he does come in higher than I'm expecting. But I think I'm probably going to shoot for something like 20% Craig Reynolds, I think would be the efficient number. So I think probably lighter than what this number is. If he does come in at 25%, I think I'd like to be light there. But if he does end up just like coming in at 12%, I'd like to be overweight to Craig Reynolds, because I think there's enough of a possibility that he just sees more, like in a regular game script, sees a little bit more action, and then obviously he still has the usual contingent upside of if something happened to Gibbs in a blowout. Again, I think he'd be more likely to come in. So yeah, kind of disheartening for me to see that he is projected for 25% ownership, because I want to be more excited here. But I think Vaki 11% here. Actually, I'm curious if that is also different elsewhere. Oh, hang on. Yeah, other places have Vaki way lower. So it's tough to do the analysis of these running backs, because I'm pretty reliant on ownership projections. Like I don't do my own ownership projections. I don't try to do my own ownership projections. So I am pretty reliant on the ownership projections that other places put out, and usually they're fairly like consistent place to place. It's less so here though. Both Jahmyr Jefferson and Sion Vaki getting very little ownership other places, and being projected a bit higher at Roto-Grinders. So I think I'm going to kind of split the difference here. Ultimately, I think I want to be overweight to I think I probably want to be right around this number, like 11% for Sion Vaki. I think makes sense. I don't think I'm going to be that different than this, and I'm going to hope that he comes in where he's being projected elsewhere. Similarly, I think Jahmyr Jefferson. Actually, they have Jahmyr Jefferson projected for 0 ownership. So that's obviously going to be not right. But I want to have a little bit of all of them. Maybe I shoot for 10% Jefferson, 10% Vaki, and 20% of Craig Reynolds is about what I'm shooting for with these running backs. I wish we just had more consistent ownership projections so I could feel better about my expectation of where they come in. I'd be pretty surprised if Craig Reynolds comes in at 25%. I'll say that just because I don't know if people are super enthusiastic about playing Craig Reynolds at this point in his career. Like I think it's just like he's an unexciting name. Whereas if it were a younger running back, maybe people would be more enthusiastic about it. But I'd be surprised if he comes in 25%. So I think I'm shooting for about 20% there and just hoping for the best. Yeah. other places I'll ask to confirm it. Other places also just these numbers are higher than we're seeing anywhere else. All right, just gonna check in on any other comments, questions, etc. before I move on to the 49ers running backs. All right. Love to see that. Not fooling around, Crow, using the Flannelverse avatar. And by the way, if you are interested in using the Flannelverse avatar, of course, I'd love to see it. And you can find it in the Flannelverse Discord. You can join the Discord without using the avatar too. So I wanted to give a shout out. If any of you are interested in joining a new community, the Flannelverse Discord, the link is in the description of this video. A lot of good people in there. Jennings and Deebo will be the biggest tilt tonight. I'm reliant on Deebo for my best ball team. Will I have any use check? Well, we'll get to it in a second here. Would you consider limiting 3-3 builds in favor of 4-2 builds? So I kind of just take what the optimizer gives me there. Like I set rules to make my lineups look the way I want them to in terms of like how they are constructed as far as stacking goes. Really just with the quarterbacks, I mostly let the optimizer give me lineups with the kind of exposure that I like, with the quarterbacks built the right way, and then just kind of let it do its thing to some extent. So I don't think about that probably as much as I should, but I don't know. I guess I haven't looked closely at what's going to be popular. I haven't looked at the ETR projection for build types. What's going to be the most common? So I don't have anything. So no, I guess no is the answer because I'm not doing anything with it. Surrounded by wild coyotes. Give me some quick tips before it's too late. Yell at them. I think coyotes would run. I don't know. Don't have much experience with coyotes. Oh, Caleb lost a leg. Sorry to hear that. You got two though for a reason. Is Ricky for San Francisco getting a touchdown? We can dream. We'll talk about it in a minute. Yeah, we can dream about it. Who's getting 2 touchdowns? If I had to guess one player getting 2 touchdowns, it would probably be Jahmyr Gibbs. Probably my guess. If you had to guess one. Who's the lowest owned captain? I like Jennings at captain quite a bit. He's not the lowest owned. There's probably players getting 0% at captain, but yeah, I think Jennings looks like a great captain. We will get there. I don't think that Jared Goff is going to be benched like at halftime. I'd be sort of surprised there. Like I would be less surprised with like the running backs where you can still just kind of run the usual game plan with just like slightly different personnel. But I'd be more surprised if Jared Goff was replaced before like the fourth quarter. All right. D-Bros, that's right. All right. People asking a lot of questions about wide receivers. So I'll just continue with the continue on. Oh, no, sorry. We're still on running backs for San Francisco, and then we will get to wide receivers. So Isaac Guerendo is the running back for San Francisco that I have the most interest in. Guerendo coming in at 3% captain ownership. I like that number quite a bit. I think that's a pretty strong captain play. I think Guerendo is just good to go. We're not having to worry about any kind of limitations there. 29% flex ownership at 8,400. I think everything looks pretty great for Guerendo. Honestly, I think he's a very strong play. If you assume that he is fully healthy, playing against a really banged up Detroit defense that has been actually let's take a look at the schedule adjusted matchup. Hasn't been amazing. Bottom 10 in the league over the past 5 weeks. But they're so banged up, and it's still like a slightly negative matchup. If we assume that Guerendo is going to get strong workload, I think it's just a good bet. I think Guerendo is somebody that I want to have a lot of exposure to at fairly low ownership. All right, let's see. A little note from Underdog. Sam LaPorta enters week 17 with 133 career catches and 16 career touchdowns. Not an incentive thing, though. Just a little note on Sam LaPorta. I'm searching inactives real quick because, again, I meant to and then forgot. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Doesn't look like I missed anything for the Lions, at least. '49ers. Izzy Banaconda is out. Don't think I was really thinking about playing him anyway. So yeah, no really impactful. All right, good. Guerendo. Guerendo is absolutely not a plotter. Caleb, come on. What are you talking about? Isaac Guerendo, like one of the best athleticism scores in rookie history on the at the combine. No, he's not a plotter. 29% ownership at flex again for Guerendo, only 3% of captain. I like it. Both places, I think I'm going to be overweight to Guerendo if those ownership numbers hold. And then we have, use check. I don't know. I'm never enthusiastic about use check. I always kind of feel like he gets more ownership than he should. Use check coming in. Where is he? 8% ownership at 2,400. Like, we did see, like, he was on a showdown slate where we saw him get his 3 catches and one of them for a touchdown. So obviously it is possible. But I don't know. I'm probably going to be underweight to 8% on, like, I'll have maybe 4%. Maybe I'll just be half the field. But I'm not enthusiastic about use check. I probably wouldn't have him if I were just playing 20 lineups. I'll have him in a 150 set. But yeah, I think he's not my favorite play. All right. And then who else do we have to? I guess Patrick Taylor. He's 6,400. That's a tough sell for me to get to Patrick Taylor. If you want to tell yourself a story, I guess projecting for 0% here. Let me look elsewhere, because he's not going to be 0%. He might be 3%. In which case, he's being projected for, I mean, nearly 0%, I guess, around the industry. I don't know. He's like, there's no strong case for Patrick Taylor other than, I guess there is a strong case for Patrick Taylor. The strong case being Isaac Guerendo has been banged up. It's possible that he's still, like, they're just going to continue to work Patrick Taylor in some. He's cheaper than Guerendo and he's getting 0 ownership. Maybe they're just able to run all over this depleted Lions defense. So I take it back. I think Patrick Taylor is worth having if you're doing 150 lineups. Having 3% Patrick Taylor at 6,400, like, he's too expensive, clearly, under the assumption that it's mostly going to be the Guerendo show. But there's some reasonable possibility that he is going to be, like, that maybe Guerendo, they don't want to give Guerendo all the work. Maybe Guerendo is a running back that they're thinking about playing in the future, and Patrick Taylor is less so. So maybe they don't want to use Guerendo for 25 carries. So I think, like, 3% Patrick Taylor in 150 set actually does kind of make some sense. I think that's all of the running backs. I don't think I'm playing any Keyshawn Vaughn. He's 200. I guess you can make the case for it, but I don't think I'm getting there. Okay. I think that's it for the running backs. So let's move on and talk about some wide receivers. All right. Everything going to start with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra getting 6% ownership at captain, and in the flex getting 37.5% ownership. All right, where's the matchup? Worst possible matchup for wide receivers against San Francisco. So don't love to see that. I still think it's, I still think I'm going to play a good amount of Amon-Ra St. Brown. Just the best offense in the league, and Amon-Ra has been awesome all year. 37.5%. I probably come in a little bit light on that at 10,000. Like, he's expensive enough that I probably come in light on 37.5% Amon-Ra. I'd like to at least, but 6% of captain. I think I'm setting a min. Actually, you can see it here. I've set a minimum captain exposure at 8% already. I don't usually set this before I start these shows. I did set a minimum for Amon-Ra at 8%. I want to be a little bit above, like 6% feels light for a player as good as Amon-Ra St. Brown is, even when he is expensive. So yeah, I'll be overweight at captain, probably be underweight at flex to Amon-Ra. And then you have Jameson Williams and Jamo getting flex 27% ownership at captain. 3% ownership. Again, JMO player, as you can see, I set my cap or my minimum at 3%. I think JMO is just the type of player that makes a lot of sense at captain. because if he does just capitalize on a couple big splash plays, he's going to be looking great at captain as a fairly like too cheap for his boom bust nature. Obviously, like even these splash play players, if he just has one and doesn't do much else, he can be optimal in the flex instead of captain. But I like JMO here. I think 3% is too low at captain. In the flex, I don't know that I'll take any major stand there. I think 27% feels efficient on JMO. Um, let me check in on my notes, see if I have anything else that I want to say about any of these guys. Yeah, tough matchup for the receivers, but ultimately, the role has been good. JMO 34 targets over the past 5 weeks, so nearly 7 targets per game on 77.3% route participation. A player that clearly has big splash play potential. So yeah, I think JMO looks like a pretty strong play. Tim Patrick is up to 4,000, getting 27% ownership in the flex. At captain, Tim Patrick getting it's under 4% ownership. I think I'm probably going to be a little bit light on Tim Patrick. The role hasn't been bad for Patrick. Actually, I'll pull up the last 5 weeks for all of the Lions. 23 targets for Tim Patrick over the past 5 weeks. So just over, I guess, just under 5 targets per game between 4 and 5. 61.6% route participation for Tim Patrick. Let's see how the trend has gone. The routes came down a little bit last week, 57.6% and just 1 target. But the 2 weeks prior to that, 7 and 8 targets on 53.5, 82.8. So what happened in week 15? They got up to 82.8. Want to make sure I'm not missing something. Was there an injury that I'm forgetting about? Might have been. Tim Patrick saw a spike here, but no, all of Amon-Ra, JMO, LaPorta all had. Oh, Brock Wright. So it was they just ran more with more wide receivers instead of tight ends. Maybe is what happened here. I don't know. Don't know what to make of that. Because then he came back down to 57%. Brock Wright came up just a little bit, so maybe they are sort of negatively correlated a little bit. I don't know. That's tough. That's a big spike, and then he just came right back down, and a big decline from Brock Wright. So I don't know exactly what to make of that for Tim Patrick, but ultimately, I think I'm going to be a little bit light on Tim Patrick, where he's getting 31% ownership overall. I'm not, as you can see, I'm not forcing him in at captain at all. I don't know. It's seems fine to me, but I think I'll be slightly light on Tim Patrick overall. And then any other wide receivers on the Lions to talk about? Allen Robinson, I guess you can make the case for Allen Robinson if you actually let me look at the other in my rules because I made groups already for Goff at captain, so I included Gibbs, Amon-Ra, Allen Robinson, Tom Kennedy, and Shane Zylstra. So these would be the 3 that are all like if you think the starters are going to sit at all, if they are going to work in the backups more than usual, all of these 3 like sort of make it into that bucket. I'm doing it more with the running backs, I think, than the wide receivers, just because I think easier for running backs to get hurt. Already some potential of like, let's try to limit how much we're using Jahmyr Gibbs in the regular season, make sure he's fresh for the playoffs, all that kind of stuff. Like it just makes sense to give Jahmyr Gibbs some rest. So I don't know that I'm going to be playing much of this trio. But I think, you can see how low the projections are. Allen Robinson probably the best bet of that group. None of them really getting much work in recent weeks. Let's see, last week, Allen Robinson ran 1 route. He's the only one of that group to even run a route last week. So it's pretty thin, but it is like less than usual just because they don't really need to play their starters in this game. I think they're going to anyway. But if you want to make the bet on Zylstra, Kennedy, Robinson, I think they're all kind of similar. Who knows who he would throw out there if he does decide to play backups. Actually, let me look at flex ownership. Zylstra basically 0%. Robinson 0%, Kennedy 0%. I mean, they're all you could make a dart throw there. I don't think I'm gonna like force any of them in. But if I get a couple shares, I think I'd be okay with it. All right. All right. Oh, Who says that was the David Montgomery injury. So you think that, huh, that's interesting. So you think that Tim Patrick played more because of the David Montgomery injury? Interesting. Andrew says line just moved a full point 3.5 to 4.5. That is interesting. Hmm. Is that just more and more confidence that Detroit's going to play their players? What's up, Wayne? Good to see you. We were just DMing, right? All right. Random Jennings blowout game. I think this could be right. We'll get to San Francisco in a minute. That's funny. Kittle has family. Doesn't Kittle always have family in the stands? Matt says Guerendo and DK Metcalf, the only players in NFL combine history to run under 4.4 in the 40-yard dash while weighing over 220. Not a plotter. All right. Tim Patrick captain. I mean, he's getting like 4%. So I'm not fortunate in, but I have no issue with it if you want to play. Like he's shown some upside in recent weeks. So I don't totally hate it, but I don't know. I'm not fortunate, like I said. Yeah, I agree. Over on Williams, I am forcing that. Daniel said, I mean, we've seen this exact thing play out where Guerendo was on the other side of it, where Guerendo, like I didn't play any of him on that slate because he was like 8,000 or something, and it was like he doesn't get any run. And then in the first quarter, we saw Jordan Mason get hurt, and it was the Guerendo show. So yeah, that could happen for sure. Tim Patrick is a good Josh Reynolds. I think that's yeah. Yeah, they can't. Yeah, so on the same page there. No, Artie, that's the reason. So they don't have it locked up, but this game is meaningless for the 1 seed. It all comes down to next week against the Vikings, regardless of the outcome of this game. So this game is meaningless. Next week is the week that the Vikings and Lions are playing for the 1 seed in the NFC. Braden playing some Zylstra. Braden says Opto giving him a lot of Jahmyr. Is it an Opto? Sims. I mean, yeah, I think he's a fine play tonight. I'm gonna have some. All right. Dick Chuck asking what other projection sets do I use? So when I'm checking ownership projections, I use several others. Stochastic, Establish the Run. Those two are the two that I'm using tonight. The other ones that I'm looking at when I'm looking at ownership projections just to compare. All right. Now, any other wide receivers on the Lions? No, we've been over the Lions wide receivers good enough. Let's talk about the 49ers receivers. Jauan Jennings getting 44% ownership in the flex at captain. Jauan Jennings getting 12% ownership. So he's not super contrarian at captain. I still think he's a very strong play. I think he's the best receiver on the 49ers. The role is really strong for Jauan Jennings. Let's take a look at the matchup here for San Francisco receivers. It is a top 12 or so. I guess I have this written out elsewhere. Yeah, everything looks pretty good for Jauan Jennings. With how banged up the Detroit defense is, I think he looks like a very strong play. Even the 12% at captain, I'm not going to be mad if I get to that number for Jauan Jennings. I mean, he's getting a good amount of ownership here, 44%. But he's only 7,800. Like he's just objectively too cheap for being the top receiver here. So I like Jennings quite a bit. I'm probably with the field all around. I have no issue with any of those numbers on Jauan Jennings. I think he looks pretty fantastic. Let's take a look at the coverage matchup for. Actually, we just talked about the Lions, so I guess I'll do the Lions first. We can take a look at the coverage grades. Positive coverage grade for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Not the ideal coverage grade for Jameson Williams, but none of these numbers are like super huge, so I'm not really concerned about them. Include all positions here. So yeah, nothing really standing out from a coverage grade standpoint of the active players. They're all like pretty close to neutral. And then for the 49ers, Nice coverage grade for Jauan Jennings. Again, not like a super big one, kind of 3.5% over. More man than usual. Interesting for the Lions. Slightly negative for Deebo, Kittle. Slightly positive for Pearsall, Guerendo, Jennings. Nothing really standing out there. But a fine matchup for Jauan Jennings, and he's just been really good. And he's targeted quite a bit. If we look at his game log, 6 targets last week on 80.4% participation. The weeks prior, 8, 8, 5, 6, 10, 11. Just he's targeted a good amount. I think he can take advantage of this matchup. So I like Jauan Jennings quite a bit. I think 7,800 is a low price tag for a player of his what he's shown us this year. So I'll be probably, I don't know, that'll be like over the field because he is getting more than 50% ownership, but I think I'll be with the field at least. I think I'll probably have somewhere in that 50 to 60% range of Jauan Jennings overall. And 12% of captain seems like a strong number. Was wishing that he'd be a little bit more contrarian a captain, but I think it's still a fair number at 12%. Then you have Deebo getting 36% ownership in the flex. At captain, we have Deebo getting 9% ownership. I think I prefer Jennings if I were playing one of them, but there's a 3% difference in ownership there. I don't have any real issue with 9% on Deebo, but I like this 36% number at flex on Deebo at 7,600. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, yeah, he had his first like good game in a while last week. Let's see. Let me see if I'm right about that. 9 targets last week on just 69.6% route participation. Scored 25 fantasy points last week for Deebo. After look at this string 5, 5.5, 5, 3, 6, 12.5, 12.5. He's been bad. He's been bad this year. I don't want to let this one game change my entire view of the situation. I do think Jauan Jennings still the pretty clear wide receiver one on San Francisco, but good to at least see that Deebo still has some upside there. I prefer again Jennings overall, but Deebo at 36%. I don't have any real issue with it. He's only 7,600. So if he gets you 15, 16 fantasy points, that might be enough. I think Deebo's fine. I'm not super enthusiastic. I'll probably be overall, he's getting 45% ownership. My guess would be that I'm a little bit light on Deebo and just make a bigger bet on Jauan Jennings. But he looks okay. Ricky Pearsall coming in at 19% ownership. This is one that I kind of want to look around the industry. Okay, looks like it is pretty consistent around the industry. 19%. I don't know. Seems like a number that I'll probably want to be on top of just because he is only 3,600 and he's getting less ownership than Tim Patrick. And I think I'm more confident that he's going to play the full game, even though I'm fairly confident that the Detroit guys will too. He's cheaper. I guess Tim Patrick has shown us more, and there's not that big of a discrepancy in ownership. I don't know. I think I come in a little bit overweight to 19% on Ricky Pearsall at 3,600. I think he's a strong play. If we look at his usage, let's look at the game log for Ricky Pearsall. 4 targets each of the past 2 weeks. So we had seen a string here where he was just not used at all. 1, 0, 1, 2 targets. They seem to have they're trying to get him the ball a little bit more in recent weeks. So 4 targets. I'd take 4 targets for Ricky Pearsall if I knew he was going to get that tonight. He has shown the ability to break off a splash play. I think he's a strong play at 19%. I think I'm going to be overweight to Ricky Pearsall. Maybe I flip my Tim Patrick and Ricky Pearsall exposures, which might be foolish of me because Tim Patrick is on the better offense, but I like it. I like the 19%. I think I'll come in overweight to Ricky Pearsall. And then outside of those 3, I mean, Chris Conley, Jacob Cowing, dart throws for a 150 set would not have either of them in a 20 lineup set, but I think they're fine dart throws in a 150 set if you feel like doing it. All right. Tight ends. I'll check in on questions, look at tight ends. All right, let's see. All right. That's a good note from Alan. Alan says Jameson needs 110 yards for 1,000 of the season. So, I mean, they're playing this week too, but maybe that gives him a little bit of incentive to make sure he gets some of those yards, put him in position next week. All right, I'm going to continue scrolling up a little bit. All right. All right. Who says, like, this game could matter if Lions Vikings tie next week, and I'd bet my house that Dan Campbell never coaches a game to a tie. I didn't realize. I guess I hadn't thought about the tie possibility. Randall says Tim Patrick targets go up against zone. Okay. Everywhere is playing a lot of zone this year. All right. Yeah, could be. Brandon says Pearsall getting a bump in usage tonight. Let the coaches see what they have. I mean, he's gotten 4 targets each of the past 2 games, so maybe they've been doing a little bit of that. See what they have in the young guy. Deebo, I believe, is 9% captain ownership. I'd be pretty surprised if the Lions come out and sit their starters without prior notice. I would be surprised if they did that. Just not. Dan Campbell is also, like, Coach Week Index, I believe, has him rated pretty highly for his honesty. Like, he doesn't lie. He says what he means. So when he says that they're going to play this one to win, obviously you can play to win with the backups, but I'd be very surprised if they came out and just didn't play the starters at all. I would not max one of Deebo and Jennings. They can definitely both get. Will using Zylstra make me different enough to take down a GPP if he hits? I mean, you still need the rest of your lineup to hit. Like, so even if he does hit, you still need the right piece around him. But he's going to be, like, very contrarian, so it'd be helpful for sure. All right. All right. Somebody, okay, Mateo Banhammer says this week and next. Come on, what are you talking about? Vikings have that one. Okay. Yeah, CW says he didn't actually say he was going to play starters normal workloads, did he? He said that they are playing to win. I don't know if he used those words exactly, but he kind of implied it at least. All right. Tight ends. George Kittle is on this slate. Everybody loves George Kittle. George Kittle coming in at 2.5% cap and ownership. Yeah, smash that. Setting a minimum of 8% here. I think George Kittle, he's just the type of boom bust play that you love to play. Captain has the ability to put up 25 any given week. Yeah, Kittle, sign me up. 30% flex ownership. That's fine. I'm less enthusiastic about that than I am about the 3% at captain. I'll probably be around the field at flex, but definitely want to be above weight to 3% at the captain for Kittle. I don't think that it's a particularly great matchup. It's a slightly above average matchup for tight ends against San Francisco. I don't really care. He's George Kittle. He can do it anytime. We looked at the coverage grade. It is slightly negative for George Kittle. Not a huge concern for me. Yeah, get overweight to that 3% Kittle at captain would be my advice. But 30% in the flex seems fine also. And then is it Eric Siebert? Classic backup tight end. Play him if you want to take a dart throw. I'm not, like, enthusiastically playing any Siebert. I guess we can take a look at his log a little bit. I cannot type Siebert. Am I spelling it wrong? I must have an extra letter in there. What am I missing here? Maybe I just don't know how to spell his name. That's what it comes down to. Eric Saubert. Eric Saubert. Yeah, that's what I was doing wrong. 6 routes last week for Saubert, 1 target on 3.8% route participation. Or sorry, that's area chair. 13% route participation, 1 target for Saubert last week. Yeah, classic backup tight end. If he scores a touchdown, you probably want him. If he doesn't, you probably don't want him in your lineup. He's 1,200, not projected for much ownership. Fine for a large field dart throw. That's about it. On the Detroit side, Sam LaPorta coming back to life in recent weeks. Early in the year, he seemed like they just forgot about him. He's only 5,800, getting 35% ownership in the flex. LaPorta getting 7% at captain. The matchup for LaPorta, fifth worst for tight ends, but again, not that far from neutral, so I'm not that concerned about that number. I'm more like, you just look at his game log over the past 5 weeks. 35 targets, second most targets on the team, 7 targets per game over the past 5 weeks on 77% route participation. I think he's back. I think LaPorta is a part of this, a focal point of this offense again, and he's only 5,800. So I do think LaPorta looks like a pretty strong play. He's getting 41% ownership overall. I don't think that he's such a strong play that I'm going to be any different from the field, but I think 45% ownership is warranted on LaPorta, just given the price tag and how good he has been, how much of a focal point he has been in recent weeks. I think he looks like a strong play at 41% ownership. Brock Wright is a little bit more interesting than he normally would be because of the game being meaningless. Like, I do think, yeah, you run your usual plays and you play a lot more of LaPorta. You play your starters for the most part, but I think Brock Wright could see a little bit more usage than usual because the game is meaningless. Like, maybe he just runs a few extra routes, not projected for any ownership. He's 1,600. I think Brock Wright is like a better than usual backup tight end play. Like, just a little bit more likely to be see more opportunities than he usually does. Kind of want to see if the ownership is the same everywhere. Yeah, other places have him. I mean, more than 0, but still sub 5% ownership. So I think Brock Wright looks like a good play at that ownership. I'll probably be over. I'll probably get to 5-6%. Brock Wright, not like a ton, but little bit overweight to the field there on Brock Wright. I think he's a better bet than usual because of this game being meaningless. All right, and then kickers and defenses. I think this is a great game for kickers in particular. I think like that's going to be one of the bigger stands that I take on the slate, and it's a boring stand to take, but I think that's one. If Jake Bates is coming in at, well, this isn't right, 5% ownership. Let me refresh this one more time. I mean, if it came in at 5% ownership, I would want to have 100% Jake Bates. Let me just reload this page. Jake Moody, 16%. Jake Bates, 8%. Am I missing a quote or something? I feel like this is way lower than it was earlier in the day. I'm going to check my other sources, make sure that I'm not missing something here. Yeah, other places have him significantly higher in the usual kicker range. In the usual kicker range, I like him quite a bit. I think I want to be overweight to Jake Bates. I think if you're worried at all about Detroit, like giving their starters some rest, I don't think you're worried about that with Jake Bates at all. They're not going to like try out another kicker instead of Jake Bates. So I think he's a phenomenal play. He also can hit 70-yard field goals. Just a great kicker for a really good offense that might be playing their starters a little bit less than usual. DFS and Life says they're going for it every fourth down. What they got to lose, I guess that would be the one concern with Jake Bates. Fair enough, but I'm not that concerned about it. That assumes that they're going to be 4th and 1 or 2. I guess sometimes 4th and 3. They are pretty aggressive with it. So I guess that would be the downside to Jake Bates. But also, he can just hit it from everywhere. I think that they're a little bit more likely to like falter in the red zone if they do go with a little bit more Craig Reynolds and such. So I like Jake Bates quite a bit. I will be over 20% Jake Bates in my lineups. And if the field does come in light, I sign me up for that. I think I'll probably have over 25% Jake Bates. And Jake Moody, I think, is also a strong play. I'll probably be over 20% Jake Moody at 4,800. The kickers just look like really, really strong plays on this slate to me. The Defenses, 49ers are only 3,400, getting 13% ownership. I mean, if you do think the Lions are going to go with any of their backups, then this would look great. 3,400, 13% ownership. I think I want to be overweight to that number regardless. Pretty good defense, cheap, kind of a lot of chaos here. I'll lean into that 13%, lean into that chaos where they're not getting enough ownership. Lions defense projected for 8.5% ownership. Not really a good defense right now. But if they do come in single digits, I probably want to have at least like 10% of the Lions defense. So I think I'll be above weight there also. But I'm more enthusiastic about the kickers in general. I think I want to be overweight to both. Okay. Going to take a brief look at FanDuel, then come back and make a couple lineups, or at least play around with the lineups a little bit on DraftKings, see what is possible to make. At MVP, man, Jahmyr Gibbs projecting for 51% ownership on FanDuel MVP. That's too much for me. Like, it's like several other players have the possibility to outscore Jahmyr Gibbs here. So if he actually does come in at 51%, I would certainly want to be lower than that number. Jauan Jennings stands out, 3% ownership going to Jauan Jennings at 11,000. I want to be above weight to that number. Kittle getting 0.5%. I think this is just an error, but I suspect that both will be like sub 5% owned, or at least sub 10% owned. And I'm going to like both Jauan Jennings and George Kittle and Jameson Williams for that matter. All three of them look great. Deebo, LaPorta, I think are also like, I like them to a lesser extent. But I think those three in particular, Jamo, Kittle, and Jauan Jennings, three of my favorite contrarian MVP options on FanDuel. But yeah, LaPorta, Samuel, also contrarian and strong enough options. Amon-Ra, if Amon-Ra comes in at 6%, I mean, yeah, I'd want to be above weight to that too. So really just getting away from the 51% being projected for Gibbs on FanDuel makes a lot of sense to me to go a lot of other places. In the flex, what stands out here? Kittle 21%, Jamo 18% looks pretty good in the flex. Jake Bates 11% in the flex looks good. Pearsall 10%. I mean, Tim Patrick, as much as I didn't love him, where he's getting a lot of ownership on DraftKings, 10% on FanDuel, that seems like a good place to play some Tim Patrick. Yeah, a lot of the same players. Like if you want to take dart throws on Zylstra, Kennedy, Allen Robinson, whatever, that's okay. Like it's just kind of an unknown situation. I suspect they're not really going to see any playing time. But if you wanted to make that bet, Jamar Jefferson, I like a little better at 5,500. That looks like a pretty good bet. Sion Vaki, similarly, he is getting 8% ownership, so not quite as contrarian there. But I think Tim Patrick, like we know he's going to be, he's the most likely to see significant playing time and still only getting 10%. So Patrick and Pearsall, I think, look good on FanDuel. Here where they're getting the same ownership at the same price tag, I would rather play Patrick than Ricky Pearsall if that is the case. But yeah, Jake Bates looks great to me if he does come in at 11% on FanDuel. Okay. Going to play around with some lineups on DraftKings. Check in on any questions before I do so. Appreciate you guys all hanging out with me, asking questions, giving your feedback. It's always appreciated. Ooh, would I play both kickers? Yeah, I have no issue with playing both kickers in one lineup. Probably not like my first lineup, I wouldn't, but yeah, I would in a 20 lineup set, I would have some that have both kickers in it for sure. Any concerns? Kittle will be asked to block more with all the O-line injuries. Not really, because they've been injured and he's been still seeing a fair amount of targets. All right. Bates seems to have a better career than Matt Prater. I mean, he's been pretty damn good. All right. Yeah, Happy New Year tomorrow, huh? Stephen, give me the reminder to get my stuff in. I will. If I'm done by 7, I have plenty of time. 7, real America time. 7 minutes from now. Not gets furious when people bring up Kittle blocking for injured offensive linemen. It's his pet peeve. All right, I'm gonna start making some lineups on DraftKings. Where do I want to start? Maybe I'll start with a contrarian one with a JMO captain. Probably just throw Goff into that one. Maybe throw in Bates. Now I do like Craig Reynolds, Vaki. Who do I want to play? I mean, I like Jauan Jennings. So I'll play Jennings from the Niners. Now I could still play Guerendo in this lineup, and I still have a lot of salary left over to. I mean, if I play LaPorta in this lineup, I'm leaving 1,200 on the table. This is probably not a super duped lineup. We've got 2 pass catchers for Detroit with Jared Goff, and then the kicker, and then Jauan Jennings, Isaac Guerendo. I kind of like this for a large field GPP. Leaves 1,200 on the table. Uses a contrarian-ish, pretty contrarian captain. I think everything like this pulls enough lever that it won't be super duped, and it projects well. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. Could also just go like if I wanted to go the more chalky route, Gibbs at captain. I think if you put not in the flex. I want to play Gibbs at captain. Playing Gibbs at captain, then I kind of wonder if you then throw in Craig Reynolds in the flex, if that is a lever you can pull to avoid a lot of dupes. I don't think a lot of people will be, making the assumption that Gibbs plays enough to be the optimal captain and Craig Reynolds still plays enough to get there, but I think it's plausible. So I don't hate that idea. Maybe then you throw in the Detroit defense if you assume they're going to be winning and running out the clock late. Jake Moody would again make sense for this lineup. Could go with a Pearsall and Purdy. And now I have enough money to put in Amon-Ra St. Brown if I want to. Why not? There you go. Both kickers, defense for Detroit, and their best receiver. And then just the Purdy Pearsall. This is somebody in chat said that they're going to do a 4-2 Lions with Purdy and Pearsall. I think Boofy said that. So I just did the same thing. I just made the same type of lineup there. All right. Yeah, I mean, can you fade Gibbs? Like, what do you mean by fade? Like in a 150 set, if you have 0, that is a lot of risk because the most likely scenario is that Gibbs puts up a lot of fantasy points here. That is by far the most likely scenario. But if you mean come in underweight, that's what I'm doing. I'm coming in a little bit underweight, which probably means I'll be in the 50 to 60% range of Jahmyr Gibbs. But if you're playing a lineup and you want to fade Jahmyr Gibbs, I think that's fine if you just want to make that bet that he's not going to have a full workload. There are a lot of outs. He's expensive enough that there's always outs for a player that expensive to fail, even if the plan is for him to have a full workload, and we don't know that it necessarily is. So I think that's fine if you want to, but I think he looks great. Yeah, fading Gibbs in a 150 set, like you are at risk of getting none of your money back. You just have to know that. So in the mini max maybe, but unless you are shady advice, somebody who's just has won so much money that you can take that kind of risk in the flagship, it's pretty risky. Harpy says everyone's been talking up Pearsall, and every time that's happened, he has put up a stinker. That is true. That is accurate. That I've done it myself. I've talked up Pearsall, and then he has been crap. So that's definitely a risk. All right, now it is getting to the time where I should probably go make my lineups. Mateo taking the other side of that 99%. So I'm going to go make my lineups, but appreciate all of you hanging out. If you would subscribe to the channel, again, trying to get to 1,000 by the end of the NFL season, have 800 or so left to go before we get there. I'm going to be doing a lot of content on this channel between now and the Super Bowl. I'm also going to continue doing content on this channel after the fact. Some NFL best ball. I don't know. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do this offseason, but there will be a lot. And of course, I'd love to have you all here after the NFL season as well. So if you would subscribe, I would appreciate it. Yes, I am maxing the mini max tonight. All right, I'm going to get going. Thanks, guys. Good luck tonight. Let's win some money. Let's see some flannel versus Avies at the top. Thanks, guys. Catch you later.